I have great pleasure today to be interviewing David Engwicht from Creative Communities International. David has 30 years experience in placemaking and is the inventor of the walking school bus and the 7-day makeover. He is an author, inventor, artist, designer, thinker, communicator and motivator. He is a TEDx presenter, a keynote speaker, and runs amazing one-day masterclasses. I think it's fair to say he is a change coach. So welcome, David, to Perth, and thanks very much for speaking with us today.
Not a problem.
So maybe let's start off with just talking a little bit about what is placemaking.
All right, so I describe placemaking as being like homemaking. Okay. So a homemaker takes a house and turns it into a home. A placemaker takes a public space and turns it into a place.
Okay.
And in fact, placemaking is homemaking in the public realm. So there was a time when people's sense of home extended out their front door, out into the street, down to the corner store, down to the centre of town. But that sense of home has been gradually shrinking over time for a whole range of reasons. So what placemaking literally is doing is giving people back that sense of home and ownership and belonging in the spaces where they live.
Okay, so that's really interesting from an aged care perspective, because all of our subscribers are basically people involved in the aged care industry.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we try to do is create domestic home-like environments within these very big buildings, because generally you have a building that might house 120 people.
Yep.
So it's like, how do we do that in such a big build and be able to create that scale and that feel of a domestic kind of home?
I think there are multiple levels to that. So the first thing I'd preface this by saying is that those elderly people have come from a home environment, and if we go back historically and you talk to them about the way that their neighbourhoods worked prior to the changes that we've seen, they will tell you stories about sitting on the front steps, shelling the peas, supervising kids playing in the street out the front.
Yes.
So they were integral cogs in that sense of home and place that used to operate in our neighbourhoods. Like if you go to European towns, they'll be sitting out on the benches on the main street, on the piazzas, where people can access their collective wisdom, so they have an ongoing role within society and in humanising those public spaces. Now, unfortunately, that's been eroded over time, and it becomes tragic when they reach a certain age where they have to be put in an aged care facility, where often those places feel more like a hospital than they do the home street that they came from.
Yes. So
I think you're right that the multiple challenges are, first of all, the actual space that they live in. Does that feel like a hospital room, or does that have some sense of home? But then what is their connection to the outside world? How is their collective wisdom accessed by the community? What kind of role do they have in their old age? So then that comes to the spaces outside of the actual living room that they're in. How do they interact with other people within that space? How do they interact with the visitors that come into the space? How do they interact with the kindergarten that's just down the street, or the other residents in that particular community? So, it's a dual challenge.
And I guess one of the issues too is that in aged care now, as opposed to what it was like even 15, 20 years ago, where you had a lot of residents who were classified as low care, so they were still a lot more able-bodied, whereas nowadays a lot of the residents that are in aged care, it's either they have dementia and they are able-bodied, or they have a much higher level of frailty. So how do you then ensure that, especially people that, because with dementia residents, they tend to lock them away because they're frightened about them getting out and hurting themselves. And with people with frailty and with the nursing issues that they have at the moment with staff, they don't have the time to be able to make sure that residents who are in big princess chairs, for example, are taken and put into environments. So I guess the design of it needs to be very carefully thought of.
I think there are multiple challenges for that. So we're making over an aged care facility in Brisbane, and we're taking what we call a whole of systems approach. Because you can design the best gardens in the world, but if there are policies and procedures within the organisation, for example, locking doors and then forgetting to unlock them in the morning. Just really, really, really simple things will stop those residents from going outdoors. So you have to take a whole of system approach, which is from the board level down. It's about, just a simple example. So aged care facilities have to have a care plan for each resident. Now, I'll bet my bottom dollar that 95% of the care plans in Australia do not include how do we give this person outdoor time. Right? Now, in drawing up the care plan, the staff should be talking to the relatives going, what did this person love doing before they come in here in the outdoors? What are the ways that we can continue to give them that kind of experience? So it's not just a catch-all, it's about what is the specific things, so if they love fixing lawnmowers, bring in some old lawnmowers and allow them to tinker with the lawnmowers. So it's really connecting them to what they love doing previously. I think the other challenge in all of this is the people who are coming to visit these people, often they just go and visit them in their room, and so they're continuing the incarceration of those people by staying with them in the room. So what's in place to encourage those visitors to take that person outdoors? And again, that should be part of that care plan of how to give them outdoor time. So in the facility that we're making, we're starting a campaign called Has the resident you're visiting had 15 minutes outdoors today?
Okay.
And then we're going to produce a little brochure that has a mud map. We're creating 5 destinations like Bali, the Mediterranean, the ponds, the town square, etc. We will theme each of those. We will have wayfinding signage so that the visitor can find their way to it. So it's a whole, and then train the staff to again reinforce that with the visitors. So I think that you just got to think creatively about how you these. We see elderly people who haven't been outside for 6 months, 12 months. And I mean that. Anybody on the board or the staff that was locked up for a week during COVID know what it's like to be locked up for a week.
Absolutely, I think one of the issues too is that there are staffing issues in aged care for sure. They don't have enough staff, and they really don't have the staff. They're finding it hard enough as it is to take care of a lot of the standard type of needs that a resident requires. So being able to do things like that, what you're saying, I guess, is to put it back on the visitors. So putting it back on them enables the family member or whoever to come in and take mum or dad on a journey,
Yeah.
and then that means that the staff it's not such an impost on the staff, so it's putting it more back onto families and visitors, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think there's multiple levels to that again. So one of the things that the staff, for a start, the staff are getting no training on the importance of outdoor time.
Yeah.
So, they don't understand that vitamin D from sunlight is essential for preventing falls, for example. So the behavioural problems will go down if the resident is spending some time. A lot of the behavioural problems are driven by the fact that they've been locked up for so long.
Especially in dementia,
yes.
Absolutely.
So, first of all, there's kind of like a small investment in taking getting the resident outdoors results in less other tasks that person has to do. So it might be a slight increase overall, but it's not that great. The issue, as I said, the staff are not receiving any training in the importance of that or how it helps diminish their workload. And then, as we've said, at the other end of it, we're not capturing the energy of the visitors. The visitors aren't really probably thinking about it either. Mum hasn't been outside for 3 months. What kind of impact is that having?
Yeah.
And why the education of the visitors is so important in my books is this: that if your mum has been locked up for 3 months and you say, do you want to go outside? She's probably going to say no. Because that's what she's got used to, right? And it's a big challenge. But if I come in and say to Mum, now, Mum, today, would you like to go to Bali or do you want to go and visit the Mediterranean? Right? You see the difference it makes?
Yes, yeah. That's the language.
So that's why, and on our little mud map that we give them those hints. We say, don't ask your loved one, do they want to go outside? Put a choice to them. They'll always respond to a choice better than if it's just, do you want to go outside, which is a yes or no answer. If I say, do you want to go to the Bali or the Mediterranean, there is no yes or no. It's either, well, I'm supposed to choose one of those two, am I?
Do I get a cocktail with the Bali trip?
So there are creative ways, I think, of engaging getting the visitors and volunteers as well, because a lot of these places have a lot of volunteers that come in. If they think their job is just to go and sit with somebody in their room, again, that's limiting the potential we have for using that resource to get people outdoors.
It's very difficult sometimes too, going to see somebody in an aged care facility. You run out of conversation because tends to be a bit of a one-sided conversation because you're telling them about what you've been doing, whereas really they haven't been doing anything. So there's not much for them to say except perhaps a nice meal that they had last night. So it does give the visitor an opportunity as well to have better engagement with their family member, because if you have created these kind of Balis or Mediterraneans, obviously when they go on the journey there's things for them to talk about along the journey. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think the other big thing, you're absolutely right, that if I go and visit Mum in her room, 4.5 minutes I've run out of things to tell her, and I say, what have you done, Mum? I sat and watched hymns of praise for 3 hours this morning, and that's about it, and particularly if you bring the grandkids with you, then they're bored out of their brains in that 3.5 minutes. Whereas I think that if they're taking grandma on the adventure somewhere, And, you know, they can go, okay, well, you know, we've been to the ponds, how about we go to the Mediterranean now? Or whatever.
Yes.
Then those people are going to stay a lot longer, which is going to take the pressure off of the staff again. So.
Yeah. So it's a journey for everyone, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So children, I think that's one of the big things is trying to, because the elderly most of them love to engage with kids.
Yeah.
And even if it's not their grandchildren, they love to be around listening to children. I mean, we all love it, really. The giggling of children is quite a gorgeous thing to hear.
Yeah.
So it is encouraging people to bring their grandchildren into spaces like that, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because they sometimes can be quite a frightening or daunting place for children to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So this sounds like a fascinating project that you're doing in Queensland. How receptive has the organisation been to looking at a different way of approaching it?
Incredibly receptive. Initially when they engaged us, I think they thought we were just dealing with the physicality of the space.
Yeah.
Now, you know, interestingly, this is a facility with lots of garden space, unlike some facilities, but it's incredibly poorly designed, or to kind of put it gently, you know, like the major secure courtyard area, for example, is just broken up with garden beds everywhere. So first of all, and none of them are raised, so they're all wheel traps for wheelchairs and Regency chairs and walkers, etc.
Yes.
Foliage just spills out over the paths. Anyway, so it's really just the whole courtyard you could best describe as a series of pathways between overgrown garden beds. Which means that their activities coordinator, when she wants to hold an event, and we were there for one, we helped her set up. We were setting up for an hour and a half for a morning tea, bringing chairs out, bringing tables out. So, you know, the design is important. So we're removing a lot of those garden beds, and we're creating a piazza, where there'll be a stage, where the tables and chairs can be set up permanently. We're creating another little activity corner where there'll be a long table that you can do craft or whatever at. So, you know, in the old days, I think, you know, the designers thought, as long as we've got gardens in there,
yes,
that's all nice, but they're not thinking about what are the activities that you want to have facilitated within this space.
Within the space. Yeah.
So there was that, and then, you know, we quickly saw things like, so for example, just really, really simple things like all of the doorways onto that courtyard area, from the dining areas, so that the number of houses that all have access onto that courtyard. But the doors are all exactly the same colour as the windows, and everything else around it.
So it's difficult to identify.
You can't even identify where the doorway is, right? And then when you go back into the space, you know which is the doorway. So, you know, we're doing simple things like just contrasting and make a contrasting colour of the doors, put curtain stoppers either side so the curtains can't get pulled across the doorway. I mean, it's just really, a lot of it is just really, really simple common sense stuff. Yes, yeah. But it's that whole package, and that's why we call it a systems-wide approach of training staff, training the visitors. We've worked with management, so you asked how much is management on board. We have a 3-year plan for systems changes, so some things are going to take up to 3 years for them to implement.
Okay, wow. Yeah.
So, and that's all mapped out, you know, that this gets done in the first year, and we'll be working on this in the second year, and this more difficult policy area we'll work on in the third year. But things like introducing a training program for staff, for example, that's a higher priority than. So an issue in some of these places is the placement policy. Where are you putting the people with the biggest mobility restrictions, for example, will determine how much time they get to spend outdoors.
Yeah.
So some of those big policy areas will take a bit longer.
So it's really a whole holistic approach, isn't it, really?
Absolutely.
It's you've got to look at every level to address your education, because you're quite right, you can create these spaces, but if people don't understand what the reasoning or the thinking is behind them, then sometimes they can just become white elephants and they're not used. Now,
one of the bizarre things for me in all of this, and I think, we're badly in need in Australia, or probably the world, of the Maggie Beer of outdoor spaces, who's going to campaign for outdoor time for residents in aged care facilities.
So can we call on you to do that, David?
I'm not sure. We'll see. If the universe hands me that job, I'll gladly take it. But if somebody else wants to, I'll support them. But here's the point. We were looking for a training module for the staff on the importance of outdoor time. And as far I did a worldwide search, and even the leaders in this field, a lot of them are in England, there's no training module.
That's interesting.
So even just that for a start, they said, "Oh yeah, we could create one for you." Well, I'm thinking, well, why hasn't anybody thought of doing even just a half-hour training module for staff?
Yeah, I think one of the changes that I've seen, because I've been involved in this industry now for over 30 years, and I think one of the biggest challenges has been that the type of resident that's in aged care now versus what they were before. We were designing spaces where they actually had car bays for residents to park, bring their car in and park. So whereas now we do have such a different type of resident, and I think the design and what they do in those spaces hasn't grown with it. It's still back in the days where people could just wander out and sit in the garden if they wanted to, but that's not happening anymore. No, I totally agree, and we certainly see that. I think that's, and rightfully so. As a society, we're trying to keep people in there, with home care packages and NDIS, etc. Keep them at home as long as possible. But that then increases the challenge of the aged care facility, because, to put it bluntly, aged care facilities are now evolving into a warehousing task, where we're basically just warehousing them until they die, a lot of it's palliative. A lot of palliative.
So, I think that's a huge challenge.
Absolutely. One of the things I get asked a lot when I go to different facilities, and I see a lovely courtyard and I say, does it get used? And the answer is no. The residents don't like to sit out there. It's too hot or it's too cold. So what would your answer be to something like that? They're putting the onus back onto the resident to say they don't want to sit out there because it is too hot or it's too cold.
No, and that's what I said earlier, that if you ask Mum, does she want to go outdoors, she's going to say no, probably a good chance. Which is why we're also putting activities like, if there are birds, in this case there's a bird cage, so you say, Mum, do you want to go and look at the birds? As opposed to, you want to go outside. So I think you've got to put attractive choices in front of that person, as opposed to I think at that age and cognitive ability, etc., a lot of them are really got to the point where they don't want change, they don't want, and too hot or too cold is really an excuse for creating a reason for why they I just want to stay where I am. But to me, we've all seen documentaries on what happens when elderly people are exposed to, say, there was the ABC show, was it Aged Care for 4-year-olds?
Oh, yeah. Gorgeous show.
Whatever it was.
Yeah.
And there was another one I saw years ago where they took a whole lot of famous people who were in their 80s or in that range, and they put them into an environment that was a reflection of when they were at their heyday in the 50s or 60s.
Is that the British one?
I think it's a British one.
Yeah.
Now the amazing, and so the wallpaper was and there'd be photographs of them when they won whatever they won or whatever. The kettles and the toasters, everything was from that era. And it was absolutely amazing. Their ages all went about 20 years back, including their physical abilities. There were people who went in there on walking frames who were dancing by the end of it.
Yes.
So the problem is that this is a mental health kind of challenge where people get into that frame of mind where they're warehousing themselves within their brain, waiting for that inevitable day. And they need that kind of push, that kind of out, and that's why we're really focusing on educating the visitors and the staff in how do you actually encourage these people to go out and re-engage with the world again.
Yes, because they almost are learning again, aren't they? It's like they've got to a stage where they are so frail and they think all of that is behind them and they don't have anything to look forward to. So, it really is incredibly multi-layered in understanding that, the kind of the mentality that they get into, and then staff and visitors take that as gospel, mum doesn't want to go, mum never wants to go out because it's too cold or too hot. Whereas I interpret that as a rationalisation for the fact that I don't feel like going outside. So they need that prod. They need that the equivalent of both those TV series show the power of the mental space that people get into. In that one, the aged care for 4-year-olds, or whatever it was called. You see that same kind of progression where at the start of it, some of them are like, get away from me, little kid, do I really have to interact with a kid again? A kid, like I thought that was over 60 years ago. And then the change that happens to them physically, emotionally, in every regard as time goes on. Their health changes, I think, in that were quite extraordinary because especially that one where that gentleman, the little boy, kept coming up and saying, come on, and, and encouraged him to actually walk that little bit further until by the end of it, he was actually walking quite a distance and was walking quite well. So I think that's fascinating about what you're doing with gardens, and I think there's just so much more of your type of skill set that could also be used within aged care, because I think another area, I could talk to you all day actually, David, but I know we have to cut it soon, but I know another area is how do we design spaces or places that don't become just ghettos. They're in a street and they're a 12-storey building, but none of the community want to go in. And one of the things that a lot of residents like to do is just to observe, to be in the middle of it. So, for instance, if they don't get visitors or they don't have grandchildren, they actually have the luxury of seeing that around them and enjoying it around them. So there's a lot, I think, to be done as well in the design of the building and how we design it so we can encourage community, not necessarily people who have someone in the aged care facility, but how we can get them to come and spend some time that the residents can actually interact with them. And then we've got the extra layer of COVID on top of that.
Yeah. So, again, I think this is about getting really creative. And I mean, you and I worked on a aged care facility down south,
which is great,
where we talked about the idea of what we call the 101 Chairs project. And this was an idea that every resident would have a chair in town with their name, or they were allocated that chair and perhaps their story was on the chair or whatever. And this was, again, a way of encouraging residents to be taken on a loop walk so they could go and visit their chair. But it was also to take the presence of those people and their stories and draw them out of the aged care facility into the community, integrating them and their story back in. I do think we think too restrictively when we're only thinking about what do we do with the aged care facility itself.
Yes.
Now, at this point, we haven't come up with some way of bringing the outside community and connecting that with the facility that we're working with. But I do think that, as with that 101 Chairs idea, there are creative ways of I guess I would call it kind of breaking down the boundaries between the aged care facility and the community in general, blurring the boundaries. So one of the things I've done with my own personal property at home is I've taken down my fences and I've totally blurred the distinction between private land and public land, and turned my entire yard into a public park.
Okay.
But I mean, that is the kind of thing that I think should be happening.
Yes.
Is how do you break the fences down? How do you blur the distinction between the outside community and the aged care facility? How do you encourage interaction there? In the case of the one that we're dealing with, the facility is a little bit insulated from the community, so I think that's kind of like that'll be the next layer of what we have to do. We've got enough challenges as it is. So,
well, maybe that would be a great project to work with you on, because I think for a lot of our clients, I think it is really important to see how we can change things up and make things different moving forward, and how we can produce a better environment for everyone, not just the residents but also for the staff, and for everybody that visits there. So hopefully one of our clients will see this, or one of our subscribers, and they might like to bring you on board. We'd love to work with you on another project. So look, thanks very much for coming in today and having a chat with us. I'm sure there's a lot more that we could have talked about, but as I said, we could have talked for hours. So so thanks very much, David.
Not a
really
problem.
Appreciate it.
It's a privilege.